Good morning, everybody, and welcome to another Coastal Drone Weekly Live. It is Wednesday, June 1 of them, 26th, and today we're going to be talking about map and chart reading. My name is Finn. I'm a flight instructor and fixed-wing flight instructor, drone pilot, drone flight reviewer, and I'm here to talk to you a little bit about how to read some of the maps and charts that are available to us as drone pilots. By the end of today's talk, you're going to know what the official charts are, what official map resources do we have access to. You're going to know a little bit about how to read them, and we're going to answer some common, frequently asked questions that I get about maps and map reading. So the first question is, what maps and charts are actually available? So I've kind of broken it down into two categories here. We've got the official sources and the unofficial sources. For the official sources, we have map.navdrone. You've got the NRC site selection tool, VTAs and VNCs, which are some of the charts that are here in front of us, and there's also the Canadian Flight Supplement, the CFS. Some of the unofficial sources that you might get, you can go to Flt Plan or SkyVector, something like this, Drone Pilot Canada and other similar apps, and DJI's FlySafe map are examples of kind of unofficial sources for map reading. We've covered in the past the NRC site selection tool and NavDrone, so just a brief look at these again. The NRC site selection tool will show you the different classes of airspace at the surface, and NavDrone will show you something similar. What's good about NavDrone is it will also show you the grid for advanced operations. Now, we've talked about these map reading resources in the past in more detail. So if you're interested in learning about the NRC site selection tool and NavDrone, you can go check out our video about making a site survey in downtown Vancouver. Some of the other official maps and the ones that I've got in front of us today are the VNCs and VTAs. So VNC stands for VFR Navigation Chart, and VTA is VFR Terminal Area Chart. These are maps for VFR pilots flying at low levels. They contain information about terrain height, obstacle height, and airspaces, nav aids, airports, things like that. You're not required to carry them, but they are helpful as long as they are kept in date and you have an up-to-date map. How do we read VTAs, VNCs, and the CFS? Well, for now, we're going to go through, we'll open these up in a moment and we'll talk about some specific things that you might find. But for now, I'm just going to briefly go over some of the things that you might encounter and some of the most important things. For drone pilots, one of the most important things you will be able to read from the map is the class of airspace. On the VTA and VNCs, you'll see a number of different symbols. Red lines will be major roads. This is so that VFR pilots can navigate using the roads. The triangles that you'll see are any obstacles, things like cell towers or big grain silos, wind turbines, or something like that. You'll see that they have two numbers. The number on top, this is the height in feet ASL, above sea level. Now, that's potentially not super helpful for a drone pilot, so very, very nice of them. They have included the height AGL, the height above ground level, in the brackets underneath. So if you look at this obstacle here, you'll see that the height of this obstacle is 553 feet above sea level. That means that a pilot using an altimeter that is reading in above sea level will know that they need to stay above 553 feet to avoid this obstacle. Then for you as the drone pilot underneath, 276, this is the height above ground level. So then you'll know that if you want to avoid this obstacle, you'll need to be above 276 feet above ground level. The yellow areas, the dots or the yellow sections, these are built up areas. These are, if you are lost at night and flying in an airplane, this is what the shape of the lights would roughly look like, so you can try and navigate yourself back to a place where you're not lost anymore. A section with inward hashes, this is Class F airspace. You'll see things like squiggles for power lines, and then a blue circle like this, either filled in or hollow. This is a airport or a heliport. The H here stands for heliport. Now, onto the airspace. For Class C airspace, you'll see these little brackets like this, and it will say Control Zone C, and then the 1900. 1900 is the top of the zone in feet above sea level, and then in the brackets, it's in feet above aerodrome elevation. Now, this is for Langley. The Langley Airport is basically at sea level, so above aerodrome elevation and above sea level are equivalent for this airport. Class C and D actually use the same border, so it's the same square bracket borders. So the way to tell if it's Class C or Class D is to look. It will either say Class or Control Zone C or Control Zone D. Now, for drone pilots, it doesn't necessarily matter the distinction between C and D. All you need to know is that you see these square brackets. This is controlled airspace. You're going to need nav drone permission. Class E is the single dashed lines, and some of the other things you might see are Class E extensions. So if you look here, these kind of are slightly translucent blue lines. This denotes a Class E above the surface. And then the 700 here, that tells you that the deck, so the bottom of this Class E extension, begins at 700 feet above sea level. Why is this important? Well, if you were maybe taking off from the mountain peak here, that's at 2,070 feet, well, that's above 700 feet above sea level, which means that you're now into the Class E extension. You're actually now flying in controlled airspace at the surface there, and you would need to request permission from nav drone. The other one that you're going to see is Class F advisory. So in this example, we've got CYA 119, and then in brackets, we've got an A and a T to 6,500 feet ASL, which is what it says here in the box here. This is continuous during daylight. So anytime that it's daylight, this CYA is active. To find out what the A and the T mean, you would look at the legend. So if we look at the legend here, you can see that A stands for acrobatic, so acrobatic flying, and T stands for training flights. There are other types of flights that you may see in different areas. H for hang gliding, M for military, P for parachute. If you see a Class F advisory airspace, you don't necessarily need to request permission or you don't need to request permission to fly there. But it is a good idea to figure out what sort of activity is happening in that area. There's going to be increased traffic in that area that you might not necessarily expect to be in that sort of location. And then there's Class F restricted. As we've mentioned in the past, Class F restricted, you need permission to fly in Class F restricted. No aircraft in Canada can enter Class F restricted without permission. Each CYA and CYR has a number associated with it. So this one is CYR 107. This corresponds to an entry in the Designated Airspace Handbook. If you go to the Designated Airspace Handbook, you could find the controlling agency of the CYR and then use that to request permission to fly in that airspace. The next one we'll talk a little bit about is the CFS. If you want to see a CFS airport diagram, you can go to fltplan.com, and in the flight planning section, you can enter the airport ID, so in this case, YYJ, which is Victoria. It will then bring you to a page that looks something like this. It's the page for Victoria, and there's a section here that says CFS, and you click on the CFS for Victoria, and then it will pull up the up-to-date CFS page for Victoria. To make sure that it's the up-to-date page, at the top of the page, it will actually say the effective date. So this one was in effect April 20th, 2023 to June 15th, 2023. Some of the symbols you'll see in the CFS, very similar. You'll see obstructions. Now in the CFS, obstructions are only in ASL, but they look pretty similar. It's the triangle. When it says the wind direction indicator, that means that is a windsock. So if you are operating near an aerodrome and you would like to know where the windsock is so you can determine the direction and speed of the wind, you would look in the CFS, find out where the windsock is. Some of the other things you'll see are these are different types of waypoints or checkpoints. Now, these are places where aircraft are going to be flying. So VFR checkpoints are normally when a VFR aircraft is entering an airport's area, it will normally enter at a known checkpoint. The other one that you'll get are instrument approach waypoints. These are GPS waypoints, and aircraft flying IFR are going to use these waypoints as they're flying towards an airport. One big question that we get all the time, and something that often will come up on the flight review, is the obstacle clearance circle. You'll see two types of obstacle clearance circle. One on the left here and the one on the right. We're actually going to start with the one on the right. So the one on the right is kind of the more simple one, the one that you'll probably see at uncontrolled airports. This one doesn't say the class of airspace that the airport is in. When it doesn't say the class of airspace, it is most likely a Class G airport. This radius tells you that within a radius of 5 nautical miles, the highest obstacle is 4,600 feet. It's actually 1,000 feet above the highest obstacle. So the highest obstacle is at 3,600 feet. So an aircraft would have to fly at a height of 4,600 feet ASL in order to be sure that they're going to avoid all of the obstacles around the airport. The one on the left, it tells you the same thing in the middle. This within 5 nautical miles, this is the highest obstacle plus 1,000 feet. This will also tell you the class of airspace. In this case, it says Control Zone D, 5 nautical miles up to 3,000 feet ASL. If it says shape irregular, that doesn't mean that means it's not a circle. Most control zones are just straight circles, but some of them have irregular shapes, especially around larger airports. Places like Victoria, Vancouver, Toronto, these have irregular airspace shapes. But using the obstacle clearance circle, you can actually determine the class of airspace of the aerodrome where you're flying without having to use Navdrome, without having to use the site selection tool. The biggest question, of course, is which maps or charts must be consulted prior to any flight. I always recommend using official sources when planning a flight. That means using a combination of normally for most circumstances you would need map.navdrone.ca. If you are operating in the vicinity of an airport, you must consult the CFS for that airport. If you're operating within their zone, if you're operating near their airport within their frequency area, if it's an uncontrolled airport, you must consult the CFS before you go flying. Another question, how do you check if a map or chart is valid and how often do they go out of date? So we talked about how frequently the CFS, or how to find out if the CFS is valid. At the top of each CFS page, it will tell you its validity date. For checking if maps are valid, what you want to do is you go to the front of the map, and on the front of the map, there will be a number. So this one this is the 15th edition for Fort Nelson. You then Google VNC validity, and there's a PDF that NavCam puts out that includes which edition of each map is valid at any given time. So then I would go and see, this is a pretty old map, so I'm guessing it's not valid. But you would go and you would see which edition of Fort Nelson, if you wanted to fly in the Fort Nelson area, which edition of the map is currently valid. VTAs and VNCs, if you're the Vancouver VTA and VNC, they get republished around once a year. And then for these, the ones that are a little bit outside of like major urban centers, it's maybe every 18 months, every 2 years. The CFS goes out of date every 56 days. So it's really important that you know that the CFS is valid because it goes out of date quite frequently. Do you need to pay for maps or charts for the flight review? You do not need to pay for maps and charts for the flight review. I just showed you there how to use Flt Plan to find CFS pages. If you are doing your flight review in the zone of in the control zone or near an airport, you can use Flt Plan to find out or to find the CFS page for the aerodrome where you're doing your flight review. For one of our mock scenarios, you can also use Flt Plan to find the CFS page for the mock scenarios. You will not be asked to bring in VTAs or VNCs for either the mock scenario or the flight review. They're quite expensive. Each one of these is, if you order them from Nav Canada, each one of these is $16, and it's $8 to ship it to you flat rate. So if you buy 4, then it's $8 shipping. If you buy 1, then it's $8 shipping. But that's not cheap, especially if you need a lot. I have these through years of collecting and picking them up by doing cross-country flights. So they're quite expensive, so we don't expect you to bring them on the flight review. And then what maps will you need to read on the written exam and flight review? On the written exam, what we're finding is that any map reading questions are going to be mostly based on the CFS. It is unlikely that a drone pilot will be using a VTA and VNC, but you have to consult the CFS before flying in and around an airport. So to that end, the questions are about the CFS. Similarly, on our flight reviews, mostly you will be asked questions about the CFS. I always ask CFS questions. I know Ian probably also asks CFS questions. It is most likely that you will get a CFS question on your flight review. Not very likely to get a question about a VTA and a VNC. Let's take a look at a CFS page and just see kind of some of the things that you'll see. So this is the CFS page for Salmon Arm, and I'm going to point out some of the information that might be important to you as a drone pilot when operating in the vicinity of an airport. First thing is you'll see the obstacle avoidance circle. This says that it is a radius 5 nautical miles, and it doesn't include the control zone. We can determine from this that Salmon are most likely Class G.
What does an abandoned aerodrome implicate for drone pilots? What about Cache Creek?
Cache Creek. So Cache Creek is an abandoned aerodrome. they put abandoned aerodromes where the airstrip is still kind of there on the maps for basically for emergency purposes. If you're out, if you're lost, or maybe not lost, but if you're low on fuel, you're having some sort of emergency situation, maybe your engine is running rough, you can look at the CFS. So Cache Creek is there. You can see it's just a hoop. Yeah, so in this case, if you've got an abandoned aerodrome like this, it will be the hoop with an X through it. It's listed on the map there in case someone is having an emergency situation, because the runway is still there, and it's better to run even if it's on an old runway that's not prepared than to land in the bush. Which means that as the drone pilot, it's most likely not in controlled airspace. There's no one to contact, and it is not very likely that there's going to be aircraft rotations in that area. If there is an aircraft rotation in that area, it is likely an emergency situation, in which case you may hear the person broadcasting on the emergency frequency 121.5, but most likely there's not going to be aircraft movement in and around an abandoned aerodrome. One of the things that you'll see on the CFS are the windsocks. You can see Salmon Arm has 3 windsocks. The difference here is that this one at the center of the runway, this one is a lit windsock. So if it's got the 3 lines here, that means there's lights on the windsock. That means that at night the windsock will be lit up.
Can a basic pilot fly near an abandoned strip?
Yes, because it's not certified nor registered nor even really an aerodrome. And it's most likely in Class G airspace. So a basic pilot, in theory, could fly near an abandoned aerodrome.
And we have another question from Sheridan.
Mm-hmm.
They say, I haven't seen any information for an airstrip located at Sandpiper Golf Course out in Harrison Mills.
No, that is not an official aerodrome. That is just a place where people land their aircraft. Sandpiper is a golf course up near Harrison Lake, and they've got a dirt strip that people land on. It is not officially an aerodrome, and it is not certified, nor is it registered. If you are flying in the Sandpiper area, it's best to look out. It is Class G airspace, and it's not considered an airport or an aerodrome, but people do take off and land there not infrequently. One of the other big things that you'll find in the CFS is the contact number of the operator of the aerodrome. Now, the Aeronautical Information Manual does say that if you're operating near an aerodrome or helipad that is uncontrolled, it is a best practice to contact the operator. So this is for advanced pilots operating near certified aerodromes, certified heliports. It is always a best practice to contact the operator of the aerodrome or heliport. Now, sometimes you'll contact them and they say, well, you can't do this operation. They most likely do not have the authority to prevent you from doing an operation if you've got permission from Navdrone, or if you don't even need permission from Navdrone because it's in Class G. This is just to give them a heads up, but the Aeronautical Information Manual affirms that you are allowed to operate near uncontrolled heliports, even if the person who owns and operates it is giving you some flack over that.
We have another question coming in from Brad.
Mm-hmm.
He asks, is the strip in Lumby listed as an official aerodrome? It's not shown on NavCan app, but others have said that it is.
Let me see if I can find it on the VTA. So Lumby is east of Vernon. So in Canada, there's no, if there's a grass strip, you can land on it. The only issue there is that it's private property. But from a car's standpoint, you're allowed to take off and land from random grass strips or whatever. It's kind of one of the advantages of flying in Canada is if I had a friend who owned a grass strip somewhere that was long enough to take off or land an aircraft, I could go land on their field, as long as you have permission. But that's one of the advantages of flying in Canada. So on the screen here, I've pulled up Flt Plan. I've already logged in here. And to find CFS pages, you would just click airport and FBO info. And then you could type in either the airport ID, if you know the airport ID, or you could search the airport or city. Marshall, any favorite small towns in Canada?
Let's go with Revelstoke.
So there is an airport in Revelstoke. So I can click get info, scroll down, and then we'll get the Canada flight supplement for Revelstoke. And then that will actually bring up the page for Revelstoke. Revelstoke's kind of interesting because it's on reclaimed land into the river, and then you can see some of the information about Revelstoke. So you can see the black dots here. This is the town. The trees are some trees. It tells you the length of the runway, and it gives you an airport diagram. Because it's in the mountains, you can see that the highest obstacle is around 9,000 feet. One of the other things that it will tell you is it'll tell you the airport elevation. You could calculate your heights above ground level for obstacles around you using the airport elevation. The CFS will also tell you the radio frequencies, and it will also tell you if there are right-hand circuits. So by default, circuits in Canada are left-handed. However, there might be scenarios where circuits are right-handed. A lot of small airports in BC have a right-hand circuit. Chilliwack has right-hand circuits. Powell River has right-hand circuits. Pemberton has left-hand circuits. Revelstoke has right-hand circuits. This is because there's a lot of terrain in British Columbia, and there's often these little airports are near towns. Having a right-hand circuit will keep aircraft away from terrain and away from built-up areas. This is the Fort Nelson VNC. The color of the terrain is its height above sea level. So on the front here, it will show you basically the darker it is, the higher the elevation of the field is. So all this area that's in the green and the beige, you can see that that's fairly close to sea level. Within each kind of, you can see there's these kind of boxes here. Within each box, there'll be a number. Here it's 2 to the power of 6, 2 to the power of 6. This is the obstacle avoidance altitude for this section. Similar to the obstacle avoidance circle on the CFS, this is the highest elevation plus 1,000 feet. So if you wanted to make sure that if you were flying in this area and you would never touch an obstacle, you would fly at 2,600 feet or higher. You can see here we've got some obstacles in and around. This obstacle is 1,968 feet ASL, so you would have to fly at least 2,000 feet to avoid it probably, but it's only 400 feet AGL. So a drone pilot, you would have to fly, to avoid it, you would have to fly at 500 feet AGL, which because this is an obstruction, it is permissible to fly 100 feet above that obstruction as long as you are within 200 feet of the obstruction. Some of the other things you'll see, you can see this kind of faded blue line. This is Class B airspace. And then this kind of zigzaggy blue line, this is Class E airspace. So these are slices. You can kind of think of it as this is the upside down wedding cake that sometimes people talk about in regards to airspace. It's Class E here at the surface, Class E at 700 feet around here, and then Class E even higher out here. In these sections, there is airspace that starts above the surface. There's like a deck of airspace that starts above the surface. You'll see provincial and national parks outlined in red. And the other thing that you'll see on these are these diamonds. So these diamonds, and sometimes they're arrows, these are VFR routes. These are recommended routes for pilots transiting the area. So the recommended route to fly in towards Fort Nelson, if you look here, is to roughly follow the highway in towards the airport. If you see two obstacles like this with a bar on top, that's a cable crossing. Also, near these airports, you'll also be able to see the radio frequencies for those airports. What's cool about these maps is if there is an airport like here, it tells you the length of the runway and the radio frequency for the airport. So if you were flying over it and you were in an emergency situation and needed to land there, you could tell if you had enough runway to land and what the radio frequency is. Today was just kind of an introduction into how to read these maps and charts and get kind of comfortable, get kind of familiar with them as a drone pilot. Again, I would recommend taking a good look at the CFS. If you're confused about something in the CFS, you can actually check the CFS legend. So I had the CFS pulled up here. This is I pay for the CFS. So I think for the legend, you may have to actually pay for the CFS to get the legend, but all of the information about flight planning can be found in the CFS legend. You can see the general chart legend. So if you're confused about something that is written in the CFS, you can find that information in the general section of the CFS. And this is actually where I pulled some of the images for the slides earlier. It gives you all the information about how to read CFS pages and how to find information about the CFS. And again, the CFS is most likely what you're going to get on the written exam and the flight review. So I would really recommend taking time to just get comfortable with CFS pages. If you are flying near an aerodrome, it is mandatory to look at the CFS.
We have two things from Ian.
Sure.
First of which is the CFS and the VNC legends are also on a blog post on an article on coastaldrone.co.
Thank you very much for joining us today on our map and chart reading session here. We've got If you want to attend these live, they're on our community.coastaldrone.co. If you're watching this on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. It really helps us out. And on our YouTube channel, you'll be able to see our full back catalog of all of our Coastal Drone community live sessions. We hope to see you on the next one. Thank you for joining us today. And we hope to see you soon on Coastal Drone.